she told her acknowledge them.
But what she told her doctors, what she told her doctors in December is that she had no homicidal ideation. She only reported suicidal ideation, correct?
Yes, and as noted, that's very common because people fear their children will be taken away.
So it's better to kill them than to have them taken away.
No, it's not better to kill them.
Hold on, Doctor.
Than have them taken away.
That question is stricken, that answer is stricken. Okay.
You say that she was very forthcoming in her symptoms to her medical providers, but she never told those medical providers that she had an impulse to harm her children, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
You also, in teaching people about malingering, about faking hearing voices or being psychotic, you give pointers of what people should look for, such as patient uses no strategies to diminish hallucinations. Patient states he obeys all commands, correct?
Yes.
You also, in a podcast, evidence entitled Identifying Malingering with Dr. Philip Resnick, you were asked about malingering and you said, and asked about hearing voices, and you said, quote, so a common example I'll use in teaching is if you hear a voice out of the blue that says, kill your mother, your moral fiber would cause you to hesitate. But if you have concurrent delusion that your mother is an evil wizard, you're more likely to act on that command hallucination, correct?
Correct.
And there's no evidence in the records or in the testimony that we've had thus far that Ms. Clancy believed that her children were evil or that they were possessed or that there was any danger posed by them or to them by such forces, correct?
Instead, Ms. Clancy...
Well, it was a yes or no question, Doctor.
No, go ahead. You can answer that.
Instead, Ms. Clancy had the psychotic, distorted belief that her children would be better off in heaven rather than being motherless. So that was her psychotic distortion, coupled with the command hallucination. So she met the exact requirement you're referring to.
And you believe that that was her psychotic delusion that they would be better off without her, better off in heaven without her, because according to your report, you could figure out no rational, non-psychotic motive for her to kill her children, correct?
Yes.
And so just because you can't figure out a motive or you don't know a motive or the person doesn't tell you a motive doesn't mean that there actually isn't a motive, correct?
There was a motive.
But that's not what I asked you. I did not ask you about Ms. Clancy. I said, just because someone tells you that they don't have a motive or you can't figure out a motive doesn't mean they didn't actually have a motive, correct?
That's possible, yes.
You also state in another article, Identifying Malingering with Dr. Philip Resnick, you point out that the rapid resolution of symptoms with medication can be a red flag, as genuine psychotic symptoms usually take longer to subside, correct?
That's correct.
Were you aware from the Tewksbury records that on page 1136 it says Ms. Clancy has been clinically stable since her admission. There have been no events of affective, cognitive, or behavioral instability since her admission, and that Ms. Clancy has not evidenced any challenges in accepting and conforming to the rules and standards. Did you review that?
Yes. I'm aware.
Okay. Were you also aware on page 1168 that it says Ms. Clancy denies that she has ever experienced hallucinatory content prior to or since that event, referring to when she killed her children, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware on page 1170, it states Ms. Clancy presents with intact reality testing and no observable symptoms of psychosis. She is actively engaged in treatment. She is able to identify possible hopes for her future, including serving as an activist for postpartum psychosis awareness and participating in a wheelchair marathon. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
I move to submit these 3 sections as the next 3 exhibits.
All right. Any objection? No. All right. Are those part of the Tewksbury records they're already in?
Yes.
Okay, those may be admitted.
Yes, please.
Page 9 still marked.
Doctor, you mentioned that when you interviewed Ms. Clancy, you spoke to some nurses who told you she had been crying every day, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that in the Tewksbury records, in the one-to-one notes of people who watched her every minute of every day, there's no record of her crying every day?
Well, when I saw her at 4 months, I'm not sure was she already, how long had she been at Tewksbury? Well, I'm not aware of that note, but my recollection is that she was observed crying.
But there's no record of her crying at Tewksbury every day, correct?
I have no knowledge of it.
And you mentioned that during the interview, not getting into anything that she said, but her affect, her expressions, her emotions, you said that they were flat and blunted, correct?
Yes.
Do you remember the portions of the video where she smiled and laughed?
Are you talking about the video of my interview?
What was that?
Are you talking about the videotape of my interview with her?
Yes. Yes, at the end of the video, do you recall her smiling and laughing?
So does that open up the video?
This is affect and behavior.
That's an issue we could talk about over here. And probably something best raised on cross.
Okay.
On redirect, I'm sorry.
And just getting into her affect and behavior, doctor.
Yes. Yeah, that's not inconsistent with her affect throughout the interview, especially, for example, in talking about
Well, not getting into
how
what she
delighted
talked
she
about,
was with
doctor. I'm not asking anything about what she talked about, just her expressions and her affect. Now, you mentioned that the Commonwealth experts saw Ms. Clancy 3 years after you examined her, correct?
I said it was 3 years after the crime.
Okay. And you're aware that the Commonwealth was not permitted to interview Ms. Clancy until after defense had filed a notice of their defense and we'd been given permission by the court to have our experts interview her, correct?
Yes.
And you're aware that did not occur until approximately 2.5 years after the incident, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that postpartum psychosis doesn't typically happen 8 months after a child's born, correct?
Yes.
In fact, typically, it's within 4 weeks of a child being born, correct?
Most often, yes.
And you mentioned that her postpartum, Ms. Clancy's postpartum symptoms began within that 3-month time frame of postpartum. Do symptoms have to occur within that 3-month period to be postpartum?
Well, there's a wide range of definitions of postpartum. Some scholars in the area make it the whole first year, others 3 months, others 4 weeks.
And in fact, her seeking help from a psychiatrist happened in September, which would have been 4 months after she gave birth, correct?
Correct.
You mentioned that Ms. Clancy was able to hide her symptoms of depression from her friends, that she was open with some people, but she was able to hide those symptoms from friends and other people she interacted with, correct?
Yes, hide the depth of her depression.
And so she was able to control and conform her behavior to situations in which she did not want to show people how she was feeling, correct?
Sure, very common.
Now, you wrote in your report on page 24 that Ms. Clancy had paranoid beliefs that her children would be taken away from her if anyone knew what she was going through, correct?
Yes.
But that's actually a rational belief, is it not? That if someone knows you want to harm your children, they might be taken away?
It can be rational, but it was more, it approached irrational in her case rather than rational.
I have nothing further.
Your redirect?
Redirect incoming. You heard Kevin Ranger try to get this video in because the Commonwealth brought it up.
No, thank you, Doctor.
Oh, look at that. This might be it for the defense.
All right, so if we could turn off that. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
All right. Reddington.
Your Honor, Lindsay Clancy rests her case.
All right. So, members of the jury, the defense has now rested its case. All right. So I'm going to talk to counsel for a minute or so over here, and we're about to go into the next phase of this case. It would be the Commonwealth is offered and given the opportunity to offer rebuttal witnesses on certain issues, and so I'm going to talk to counsel first, and I'll inquire of the Commonwealth if they wish to offer these rebuttal witnesses. Okay? So, counsel, can I see it sidebar?
11:52 a.m. Lindsay Clancy and her defense rest their case. Now we've got the Commonwealth rebuttal coming up ahead, and it's not a short day like others have been. We are expected to see the Commonwealth rebuttal case. I'm not sure how many witnesses we are going to call or they are going to call, but we're about to find out. What did you all think of that exchange between, well, first of all, the direct exam of Dr. Philip Resnick? I'll go through it in just 1 second. What did you all think? And then what did you think of the Commonwealth cross? Let me know. Let me go down here and take a look. All right. So thank you, Kayla. I appreciate that. We're coming back here.
Attorney Sprague, does the Commonwealth wish to offer any rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. If you call your next witness, please.
The Commonwealth would call Dr. Avery Mack.
Dr. Avery Mack for the rebuttal.
Good morning. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony and the evidence you shall give to the court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may proceed, sir.
All right. Good morning, Doctor.
Morning.
All right. I just ask you to keep your voice up so the jury can hear you. And with that, Attorney Attorney Buckingham, please.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please tell the jurors your first and last name?
Avram Mack.
And would you spell your name for the record, please?
Avram is spelled A, V like Victor, R like Robert, A like Apple, M like Mary.
And I'm just going to ask you to speak in a loud, clear voice. And if you need to kind of push closer to the microphone, that might help.
will.
Thank you. What do you do for work, sir?
I'm a psychiatrist.
And how long have you been a psychiatrist?
After training, I've been a psychiatrist for 22 years now.
And can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
Sure. I went to the University of Michigan College, Cornell University for medical school. I was here at the Brigham for residency in psychiatry. And then that was followed by a fellowship in child psychiatry at Columbia University and a one-year fellowship in forensic psychiatry at New York University.
And what do you do now? What's your area of practice now?
I'm a psychiatrist. For all these 22 years, I've been serving in a lot of different roles. Currently, I'm a professor of psychiatry at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, and I see patients at a child hospital called Nemours.
And so you, in your current practice, have a clinical practice, and you also do forensic psychiatry. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you have any board certifications?
I do.
And what are you board certified in?
I'm board certified in psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and also forensic psychiatry. I had been board certified in addiction medicine by the American Board of Addiction Medicine, but they closed. So I don't know if I can still say that I'm board certified by them.
Okay. And to what extent are you engaged in the forensic psychiatry? What areas of forensic psychiatry do you have you testified in?
I've provided testimony in perhaps almost every area of forensic psychiatry, ranging from testamentary capacity of adults who engage in contracts, or appropriateness for adoption, or whether or not a person is competent, or if a person is criminally responsible.
Now, in what areas of the country have you testified on those topics?
Around the country. I'm not sure how many states I've testified in, but I've been engaged in reviews or investigations of cases in, I think, more than half the states.
And what does it mean to conduct a forensic evaluation in psychiatry?
Well, it can mean a lot of different things depending on the question that's being asked by a court or other authority. Sometimes there are statutes that you as the forensic psychiatrist need to try to answer a particular question that a statute requires. Or sometimes it is a matter of giving an opinion, say in a civil case, where it's your understanding of, say, the degree of harm that the person has experienced. Sometimes great, sometimes not so great.
And you, in your experience, have testified as a forensic psychiatrist in both civil and criminal matters, correct?
Correct.
And are you aware of a difference between forensic psychiatry versus forensic psychology?
There are differences, aside from the fact that they're different professions, but they both cover mental health. There are different rules that apply to forensic psychologists in their carrying out their roles as psychologists.
Now, when you mentioned that you have done some work and testified in matters regarding criminal responsibility, right?
Correct.
And you're aware that different states have slightly different statutes when it comes to criminal responsibility.
Yes.
And so in this case, you were asked to review the matter of the Commonwealth versus Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Yes.
And so in order to do that, did you review the statutes here in Massachusetts regarding criminal responsibility?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us how it came that you were involved in this case?
I was asked by the prosecutor's office to be involved as a psychiatrist reviewing the matter.
And when you're asked or you're retained by either side in a case, defense or prosecution, what is the goal of the evaluation? Are you just trying to advocate for the side who hired you, or are you conducting an independent evaluation of the evidence?
Overall.
You can answer.
Well, to answer your question, certainly the goal is to provide an independent evaluation, or one would also add to provide clarity and to say what can be said. In criminal matters, sometimes it's a very certain question that it's either a yes or a no. In other matters, it's not always necessarily a strict yes or no.
Now, in criminal matters where you were asked to conduct these independent evaluations, how do you approach it? What kind of information do you seek, or would you prefer to have in order to conduct the evaluation?
Well, generally one starts with the statute and then tries to gather or review what information exists to understand the mental state of the person, if that's pertaining to the particular statutory question, and to understand the mental history and the mental state of the individual, and to see if that can be applied to the questions at hand.
And so what types of records are you generally looking at when conducting a forensic evaluation for something like criminal responsibility?
Well, one would certainly want to review psychiatric records if they exist. Ideally also to have examined the individual and to gather information, not only historical information from the individual, but to do, in that sense, an examination in real time. And that provides you the information, what we call a mental status examination.
Okay.
Other records are also important: medical records, educational records, and other records that describe the individual.
And when we're talking about a criminal case, fair to say you review the entire criminal file too, right?
Yes.
And when you're doing these evaluations and creating a database of this particular information, are there any limitations to your opinion or evaluation?
I'm not sure how you mean that.
Well, when you have these evaluations that you're conducting, namely for criminal responsibility, do those evaluations, are they limited based on the information that you have? Meaning, if you don't have everything at the time you do your evaluation, is there kind of a caveat to your opinion?
Well, when I write an opinion or state an opinion, it is based on the totality of the information that I have. If additional information comes along, I am open to receiving that and integrating that into my understanding of the totality.
Now, when you interview the individual in these evaluations, the purpose of the interview or purpose of your contact with them is not to provide treatment, correct?
Correct.
And the opinion that you reach ultimately is based on the defendant's mental state, correct?
To the extent that impacts the question, yes.
Okay. Well, when we're talking about criminal responsibility, you'd agree that's the kind of the central issue, is the person's mental state at the time of the alleged offense, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So in Massachusetts here, with the question of criminal responsibility, are you aware of what the standard is?
Yes.
And what is it?
Well, it uses particular language based on a common concept throughout the country called the McNaughton standard. And I could read to you the specifics of the language, but effectively it refers to two pieces. Well, actually starts with three. One is, did the person have a mental disorder at the time of the event? And then secondly, the two prongs speak to specifics about the mental state at the time. One being, I would want to refer to the actual statute.
Well, if we can, maybe we break that down for the jury.
Yeah.
So the first part of this for criminal responsibility is the question of, does the person suffer from a mental disease or defect, correct?
Correct.
Objection to the leading. Let's see if he knows.
Yeah, if you just ask him.
I can rephrase
He's aware,
that.
and if you want to refresh his memory, you can.
Well, you've already testified the first part of the analysis, and I think you used the terminology mental disorder.
Yes,
right?
I did.
And you're aware that a mental disorder is a clinical term.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I apologize. What was that?
A mental disorder is a clinical term. The terminology mental disease or defect, are you aware that's a legal term?
Okay.
Okay. Well, so when you were conducting evaluations for criminal responsibility.
Is that an answer?
Yes.
Said,
I'm
okay.
sorry. Yes.
Yeah, all right.
When you're conducting an evaluation for criminal responsibility and you're trying to determine whether a person suffers from a mental disease or defect, do you look to mental disorders to see if that meets criteria?
I would evaluate if the person has ever had a psychiatric or a mental disorder.
And what kinds of tools do you have available to you to do that?
Well, there are two tools. One is gathering of historical information, and the other is the information you gather from actually seeing the person face to face.
And as a psychiatrist, that's something you do in your clinical practice all the time, right?
Correct.
Because one of the main things you're going to do is look to try to diagnose an individual.
Correct.
And so how do you go about determining that if a person has a mental disorder?
In psychiatry, we make diagnoses in a descriptive manner. We look to see ways in which the individual has symptoms or signs of mental disorders or mental defects or psychiatric disorders. So in particular, one will start with trying to gather as much information as possible about what are the things that bother the individual. That may be their mood, that might be things that they get anxious about, that may be abnormal movements that they make. And that will also be aligned with understanding their medical condition, any medications that they take, any substances that they use. There's an array of information, sets of information that one gathers in that portion where you ask questions. But effectively, you're asking questions about symptoms. And one is trying to understand not just symptoms, but the degree of impairment that symptoms might be causing an individual.
Okay. And do you work with any sort of tools that help you identify particular characteristics of symptoms associated with disorders in your field?
Well, at times, individuals use scales or tests, which can be psychological tests or scales that ask particular questions. Or other times, you might use tests that are biological tests, like the person's brain waves, called an EEG, or laboratory tests.
When you're talking about diagnosing an individual for any particular mental disorder, are there specific criteria for different types of disorders?
Yes, there are.
And is there a source that you use as a psychiatrist in order to identify the criteria for different disorders?
We use a text called the DSM, otherwise known as the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's currently in its 5th edition, or actually a revision was made of its 5th edition. And so that text, which is created and vetted by a large number of professionals, provides criteria for the different disorders, and these are known as operational criteria. In psychiatry, there aren't necessarily gold standards that you can use for diagnosis, like finding a bacterium or finding an anatomical tissue. So for the last 60 years, 70 years, psychiatry has turned to agreed upon definitions that are listed in the DSM.
Okay. And you said it's not the end all be all, right, of diagnosing. You use your training and experience as well, but it's a tool that you use.
Well, they are the criteria that one uses to make the diagnosis. It is not a guidebook for how to gather that information. It's not a how-to, but it is the standard.
Okay. So now going back to the legal standard here in Massachusetts, so one part is the disorder, right? And you said there's a second part.
Right. So the second part are particular criteria about the person's state at the time of the event. So one of them is they both utilize the verb to have retained substantial capacity to know the act was wrong or against the law, and the other being retain substantial capacity to control or conform one's behaviors to the law.
And so when you're talking about criminal responsibility here in Massachusetts, is it fair to say you're looking at the person's conduct and their condition at the time of the offense?
That's right.
And the information that you're gathering in this overall evaluation, getting history and kind of looking at the person as a whole, is that helpful to understand the person's diagnosis when you're being asked this particular question?
Yes.
But ultimately, you're rendering an opinion of the person at the time of the offense.
That's correct.
So in this particular case, you were provided a series of records and information regarding the defendant, Lindsay Clancy, correct?
Yes.
And can you just give us a general overview of the sources of information you had available to you?
Generally speaking, there was the criminal file, as you mentioned before. And then in terms of medical or psychiatric records, there was the records from the hospital that she's at right now, the hospital that she was at right before, called Spalding, the hospital that she was at before that, which was Brigham and Women's. In addition, there was the medical records from outpatient treaters, and there was also the records from her admission to McLean Hospital. So overall, there were outpatient records, there were inpatient records. For the most part, those all correlated with her own care. Additionally, we received the pediatric records for some of the victims in this matter. And as I mentioned before, the criminal file.
Okay. And in addition to the records related to the defendant herself, we also provided some other reports to review.
I was.
By other psychiatrists and psychologists?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that one of the things that's useful in these evaluations is an interview with the person themselves, right?
Yes.
And did you engage in an interview with the defendant?
I did.
And when did that occur?
I interviewed her on April 10th and April 12th of this year.
And that's of this year in 2026?
Correct.
And what were your observations of her when you first met with her on April 10th? Can you describe her demeanor?
Generally, she was friendly and cooperative.
When you begin an interview with an individual that you're evaluating, do you conduct what's referred to as a mental status exam?
Well, the mental status exam happens all the while that you're interacting with somebody. You're always observing for aspects of their emotions, how they speak, their mood, and so forth. Sometimes there are directed aspects of the mental status examination where you are asking about particular cognitive capacities like executive functioning and attention and concentration. But the gathering of information about the person's mood, for example, or their thought process, that happens throughout the entire portion.
Okay, and so over the course of the time that you met with the defendant, were you able to make observations of, for instance, whether she maintained eye contact with you when speaking?
Right, so she did maintain eye contact.
Okay. What about her emotional state?
So overall, if we go through the various components, like what's called her affect, which is her emotional expression or her mood, generally speaking, there were not many abnormalities in her presentation, and I can go through them. They include the way in which she speaks, that is to say the rapidity of speech, if the speech is made in sort of regular intervals between words. In terms of thought, does the person, and in this case did Ms. Clancy, make goal-directed ideas? Mm-hmm. Was there a particular content of the ideas? So generally speaking, for all the components of the mental status examination, there were not really abnormalities. I would say at some points she seemed distressed by some topics. I believe tearful at one point, but otherwise nothing remarkable on mental status examination.
Okay. And in these evaluations, when you're interviewing the individuals, are you also kind of taking account of their physical presentation?
Yes.
And obviously, when you met with her in April of 2026, you were able to observe her physical condition, right?
Yes.
And what were your observations of her physical condition?
Well, she's utilizing a wheelchair. Generally speaking, there were not necessarily abnormal movements that I observed. She seemed comfortable physically.
Did you find that she was able to kind of navigate her situation herself? Meaning you were in a room with her with other individuals, right?
Yes.
And she was able to kind of take care of her own.
I'm going to object leading at this point, just as they object.
Sustained, if you just ask the observations.
What did you observe her do as far as moving herself around the room? Was she able to do that?
Yes. At the moments when there were transitions, when we took a break and she went out to the hall, she was able to navigate her wheelchair one place or another.
And when you spoke with her on April 10th and April 12th, were you able to kind of have a conversation with her about her level of functioning at the Tewksbury?
Yes.
And did she tell you anything about what her general day looked like?
She described her general day. She described basically her existence there at Tewksbury.
Okay. And did she indicate to you whether she engaged with other patients, or did she spend her day mostly in bed, or what did she say about that?
Mostly, she described she stays in bed or on her own. I don't think she described interacting with patients very much. There were a couple of ways in which she did interact with staff, at least. There was a therapist that she described working with. She did describe having had a physical therapist at a certain point. I'm not sure if I remember if she still was getting physical therapy. She stated she wasn't very interested in the physical therapy that she was getting there. She wasn't interested in the food there. She described having visitors at a not infrequent basis, and that sometimes she was able to eat food or drinks that were brought in by them.
And who were her visitors, if you recall?
Family members mostly, as well as, I believe, both, and I'm not sure if they were specifically from the Brigham or Mass General, but or any place in particular, but I believe religious figures, chaplain or priest from some organizations.
And her having told you that she kind of has visitors, were you able to corroborate that in reviewing records that she had visitors?
Yes.
And were you able to corroborate, or were you able to identify in the records that she did interact with staff and patients at the hospital, according to the records?
To some degree, yes.
And you said that she had indicated to you that the food wasn't appealing at the hospital. And did you have the chance to observe her consuming her own snacks or beverages?
Beverages, yes.
Now, did she indicate to you her level of attention to hygiene and grooming while at Tewksbury?
She did. She described that she wasn't very interested in her own hygiene or grooming.
And were you able to later in the conversation speak with her about her ability to take care of her own daily activities like grooming? For instance, showering. Was she able to do that on her own?
Showering is embarrassing. It requires staff to help her. And that's one way in which she would rather not. It may also be that she described a lack of interest. So it's both components.
When you observed her, did she appear to be disheveled or not properly groomed in your meetings on April 10th and 12th?
No, she appeared groomed sufficiently, and I believe her hair was combed and she was wearing neat clothing.
Now, did she describe to you her thoughts or feelings about her current situation?
Yes.
And what did she say about that?
Well, she described feeling depressed, which she termed situational depression. She described feeling, I'm not sure the exact term she used, but feeling miserable, not wanting to be alive.
And
Let him finish, please. If he's finished, that's fine, but don't cut him off.
No, yeah. Sorry.
I'm sorry, doctor, were you done?
Yes.
Thank you. So when you were meeting with her, do you recall her indicating that she reported being devastated,
Yes.
that she was devastated and grieving by her current situation?
Yes.
When you met with her at the Tewksbury Hospital, did you go over with her what her current treatment regimen is, what current medication she was on?
I did.
Was she able to tell you what medication she was taking?
Yes.
And were you able to confirm that with the records, that that was an accurate report?
Yes.
So what medications, when you met with her in April 2026, was she currently on?
Well, in terms of psychiatric medications, the main medication of note is olanzapine. I believe that there were several medications being used for her physical needs. One that helps with her bladder, one that helps with movement of the GI system.
Well, let's just kind of focus on the psychiatric medications, right? Because that's of your interest here. You mentioned olanzapine. What's the common or the brand name for that?
It's called Zyprexa.
And what is it used to treat?
Originally, it was created to be an antipsychotic medication, so to treat psychosis.
Okay. And are you aware that it's prescribed to Ms. Clancy for bipolar?
Yes, it is also used for mania. It is also sometimes used.
The question was bipolar.
Yeah. Yeah. The question, if you could just listen to the question, answer the question, and then if the Commonwealth or the other side wants to add to the answer, they'll ask you, okay? Go ahead.
So I think my question was, are you aware that the Zyprexa is prescribed for bipolar?
So bipolar is a disorder. Yes, bipolar is a disorder of mania, which is, I'm sorry, why I was mentioning at that point.
And what was the dosage of Zyprexa that she was on, if you recall?
I believe it was 2.5 milligrams.
And in your experience, is that a significant dosage?
No, it's a small dose.
Are you aware of any other psychiatric medications that she's prescribed at Tewksbury?
I believe she's also taking trazodone.
Okay. How about Wellbutrin? Is that ring a bell?
Yes. Well, Wellbutrin is an antidepressant medication.
Okay. And clonidine? Does that sound familiar?
Yes, clonidine is a medication that's sometimes used for anxiety or to help people go to sleep.
And are you familiar with the propranolol?
Propranolol is also a medication. It also is sometimes used to help with anxiety.
Okay. And as far as the dosage of medication that she's on, based on your review of the records, are those high doses, low doses?
Overall, they're on the lower side of dosages.
And you indicated briefly in your testimony that she had reported to you that she believes to have situational depression.
Yes.
Did you have a conversation with her about the diagnosis from Tewksbury?
There were times that if you're asking about bipolar disorder, at one point she made the statement that she wasn't convinced that she has bipolar or has had bipolar disorder. She described situational depression in terms of feeling depressed about the several stressors that she experiences today.
And what are those stressors?
Well, the remorse and sadness about the events that this case is about, her separation or estrangement from her then husband, her being separated from the world, her physical injury.
Do you recall her actually using the term remorse, or is that just your description of the conversation you had?
That's my summarization right here.
Okay. Now, when you were meeting with her, did you talk to her about past medication regimens that she had been on prior to the current regimen of the Zyprexa and Wellbutrin?
Yes.
And so are you aware that she had previously been prescribed at some point lithium?
Yes.
And is that something that would be important to you to know when you were conducting your own evaluation for diagnosis of whether somebody was on lithium?
It might help, but in psychiatry, we don't make diagnoses based on medication response.
And when it came to the report of the lithium, fair to say it was not something that was trialed for a very long period of time.
Yes, and let me correct that. It's not that we don't make diagnoses. We don't categorize or define disorders by medication response. I heard the description of the trial of lithium. That was a short trial.
Okay. And about her physical injuries, did you have a conversation with her about her understanding of her physical injuries?
Yes.
Do you recall whether she reported that she had any head injuries after January 24th?
She denied that she had had a head injury.
And was she familiar with the extent of her spinal injury?
Yes.
Meaning she was able to explain to you where the injuries occurred? And
That's correct.
were you able to review in your interview with her past psychiatric history?
Yes.
And did she have a significant past psychiatric history?
Prior to the year 2022, she had not. She had been, over time, very hard driving, someone who tended to get anxious, and anxiety sometimes pushed her to achieve or to do things. There had been two short periods of depression or anxiety throughout her lifetime. In one, she had been prescribed antidepressant medication around 2 years before 2022, which she had not actually taken. She had tended to resolve her anxiety or depression through exercise and hard work.
And when you say the two short periods, are you speaking of periods after childbirth?
One was while she was in nursing school, and the other was after the birth of her second child.
So you were able to have the conversation with her about nursing school and going on medications during that experience, right?
Yes.
And as far as the second episode where she described anxiousness and seeking medication, did she indicate to you whether she actually took medication?
No,
After
she
the
had,
birth.
sorry.
After the birth of her second child?
She had been prescribed it, but she hadn't taken it.
Now, based on your review of records and your interview with her, were you able to identify and learn some general information about her family history?
Yes.
Did she report anyone in her family suffering from any other mental illness in the past?
No.
So no history of bipolar disorder or prior depression?
Correct. No such history.
Did you also review with her her work history?
Yes.
And did you talk to her about whether there were any adverse events in her past that affected her?
That is something I asked about. And also I was able to look at her records to try to elicit if there were any particular adverse events in her life.
Did you find any?
No.
Evidence of any? And you said that prior to 2022, there hadn't been, or there was minimal psychiatric history. Did you look at and talk to her about the period of 2022 from approximately September leading up to the events of January 24th, 2023?
Yes, I did.
So as far as going through that time period, you were able to review her medication history during that time?
Yes.
And fair to say there was a significant amount of medications that you looked at as far as what she was taking and what it was prescribed for.
Correct.
Did anything stand out to you in the timeline of her medication history that was significant in this case?
Well, she was initially prescribed medication in September of 2022. She didn't actually start taking that medication, sertraline, until October. There were several different medications that were prescribed. It is not clear that she actually took every medication that was ever prescribed or that she necessarily took it more than 1 or 2 times. There was a period of trial on a second antidepressant called Prozac. There were various medications used to help her to sleep. Period of taking a medication called Seroquel or quetiapine.
Are you familiar with that medication in your practice?
I am.
And is it fair to say that that medication has multiple functions, like most psychiatric medications? When you reviewed her history, what was the initial dose that she was prescribed for it?
Just 25 milligrams.
And what is a 25 milligram dose of Seroquel? What is that generally prescribed for?
Well, it's often prescribed these days to help individuals to sleep. But Seroquel is also, like Zyprexa, a antipsychotic medication. It can be used to help people to sleep. It can be used to help psychosis. It can be used to help the treatment of depression.
Okay. And as far as your review of the medication timeline for this defendant with the Seroquel, would the amount of time that she took the Seroquel have had any lasting effects biologically on her brain or her body?
There's no known effect that one would have from the amount of time that she took it. There could have been temporary effects, which could have been affecting her functioning or her psychological reaction to her functioning. But there's no known biological long-term effect.
So when you say that they could have some effect, are we talking about symptoms or negative symptoms maybe?
So Seroquel might affect a person's ability to think straight. We talked earlier about cognition, the ability to pay attention, to concentrate, to have memory. And Seroquel can negatively affect your cognitive functioning, although it is expected that that will eventually go away when you stop taking the medication.
And is Seroquel a type of medication that lingers in a person's system?
Not substantially. There are some medications that do linger, like diazepam or Valium, which is another medication that she was later prescribed. All medications are, on a relative basis. So diazepam will stay in your body much longer than, say, lorazepam, a different benzodiazepine.
Okay, but as far as the Seroquel goes, once a person stops taking it, is it fair to say that the symptoms or any negative symptoms that they have would eventually resolve themselves?
Yes.
And you're aware of the medications, the last reported medications that the defendant was on right before the events of January 24th?
I am.
And what were those?
Melatonin, lorazepam, trazodone, and an antidepressant medication called amitriptyline.
And as far as the amitriptyline, you're aware of what the dosage was?
Well, on the day before January 24th, it became 20 milligrams, but for several days before that, it was 10 milligrams.
Now, in your experience, a 10 milligram to 20 milligram dose of amitriptyline, is that a significant dosage?
It's small. The usual starting dose for an adult is 150 milligrams.
Are you aware of what the chief complaints or problems that the defendant had been reporting at the time when these medications were all being prescribed to her in 2022?
Well, it's a several-month period, but it started in September of 2022 with complaints of anxiety and depression.
And fair to say, in reviewing all the records and with your conversation, that sleep also was a main issue or a complaint.
Yes, that's right.
And in some of the medications that you reviewed, is sleep, could the medications themselves affect a person's sleep?
Yes, sertraline can.
Now, as far as past diagnosis of this defendant, you were able to review overall and all the records that were available to you what different providers had given as far as past diagnoses, correct?
Yes.
And as far as your overall evaluation in determining criminal responsibility, where you have to answer first that question of mental disease or defect, do you rely on those prior diagnoses or do you come to your own conclusions?
I come to my own conclusions.
Are the fact that there were past diagnoses something that you consider?
Yes, especially to the extent that they highlighted the basis for those prior diagnoses. I don't necessarily have to agree with the diagnoses, but I'm interested in what was observed in terms of coming to those diagnoses.
And when you're doing these types of evaluations for criminal responsibility, why do you not rely on a past diagnosis? Why do you come to your own conclusion?
Well, that's part of being an independent evaluator, where in your mind, you're able to collate the information and make your own diagnosis.
As far as kind of before we move on to your actual diagnosis, in addition to the interview that you had with the defendant over those 2 days, reviewing all the records, did you attempt to speak with what are called collaterals?
I did not.
Is that something that you sometimes do in these evaluations?
Sometimes.
Fair to say in this particular case, you did have a significant amount of information from people that were close to the defendant, right?
That was my view, yes.
And after speaking with the defendant, did she identify to you some people that maybe you could talk to?
I don't remember who she said, but I think she suggested perhaps her husband or then husband.
But you yourself didn't have an interview with Patrick Clancy, did you?
No.
But you were able to review his grand jury testimony and interviews he's given with the police in the past, right?
Yes, I did. And CPS.
And as far as speaking with the defendant's parents or her sister, are you aware that attempts were made or requests were made to speak with them, but they didn't respond?
I wasn't aware of that. I was not.
So based on everything that you reviewed in this case, were you able to come to a conclusion about diagnosis?
Yes, I did.
And at the time that you conducted this evaluation, what is your opinion about diagnosis?
My opinion about her diagnosis in the span from 2022 to 2023 is that she suffered probably as a part of what's called a major depressive disorder. But the important point about it is the major depressive episode.
What made you come to that conclusion based on her presentations?
The information about her feelings and the progression of her illness highlighted that it was best represented by a major depressive episode. It's a condition defined in DSM-5 where an individual displays problems with mood, problems with feeling pleasure, feelings of guilt or worthlessness, problems with appetite, problems with sleep, preoccupation with death or suicide, poor concentration, poor energy, perhaps also what's called psychomotor agitation or retardation. So one doesn't necessarily need to show all of those, but as it is in the DSM criteria sets, one needs to have a certain threshold. And her history and her description of her experience, in my view, matched a major depressive episode.
Okay. And you indicated that it was kind of a progressive thing from the fall into January of 2023, right?
Yes.
And in addition to the low mood, were you able to identify that she presented with anxiety at various points?
Yes, very much.
And did you also make observations of obsessive thinking?
Yes, obsessive thinking is a kind of anxiety, where you repeatedly think about a topic, maybe that you're asking, what if, what if, what if? And it's the kind of form of anxiety that you frequently see in an anxiety disorder called generalized anxiety disorder. I think it's possible she also had generalized anxiety disorder, but that is sort of secondary to the major depressive episode.
Okay. Now, in the time closest to January 24th of 2023, did you take a look at what her presentation or what her mental state was then, based on all the information that you had available to you?
Yes, I did.
Did you identify whether she was ever presenting in a manic state or a hypomanic state?
Throughout the period from 2022 to 2023, no. There was never indication of any element of mania or hypomania.
So just to make it kind of clear to the jury here, when you talk about major depressive disorder, that's a identified disorder in the DSM, right?
Yes.
And when we use terminology like mania, right, what is mania?
So mania is a mood state, just like major depressive episode is a mood state. And these are the sort of building blocks of the mood disorders, bipolar disorders and major depressive disorder. So just like major depressive episode, mania is defined in the DSM, where with a certain time threshold, in this case for mania, 7 days, where you consistently have at least 4 of the following symptoms, you would be called being in a manic state. So that includes distractibility, a type of thinking called flight of ideas, grandiosity, excessive goal-directed behavior, pressured speech or some abnormality of speech, a reduced degree of need for sleep, and also the 7th would be an engagement in activities that have a high potential that are pleasurable but have a high potential for painful consequences. So mania requires 7 days of that, most of the day, every day, and you need 4 over 7 days. Hypomania is a lesser type of mania, and you need only 3 over a 4-day period. In both cases, as it is for major depressive episode, you also need to demonstrate that the person is impaired in a clinically significant way. That is to say, they have clinically significant impairment or distress. So these are the building blocks for the mood conditions that we're talking about.
And so when you say you looked at the defendant's condition from September through January, September 2022 through January 2023, did you observe or did you find any evidence of mania or hypomania in what was reported was her conduct or her presentation?
I could not find any example of behavior or thinking that corresponded with those elements of mania or hypomania.
Now, what about in the days immediately after the incident, were there, you said you reviewed records from Brigham and Women's Hospital, correct?
Correct.
Did you identify or could you find any evidence of mania or hypomania during that time period?
No.
And in fact, there are actually some instances that would tell you that she was in those states, correct? Like her behavior?
Yes, sustained.
During the time period of immediately after the incident, what did you observe or did you observe in the records some activity at Brigham and Women's Hospital that would show that she had linear thinking and goal direction?
Well, after she was removed from the medication called dexmedetomidine, which was sedating her and having her sleep intentionally. After that point, she awakened, the records indicate, and was able to think coherently with goal-directed thoughts. One example, and so the various mental status examinations done by the doctors at the Brigham generally showed normal mental status. One particular portion of the record reviews their review of whether or not she had the ability to make a decision, in that case a change to her healthcare proxy. And so the physicians there were able to examine her closely in order to understand that she did have decision-making capacity.
And that's an example of something you reviewed in the record that was close in time to the incident itself, correct?
Yes.
And you also were able to review records from Jennifer Tufts from an appointment with the defendant the day before the incident occurred, correct?
I did.
And again, in those records, did you find anything that would have been suggestive of mania? What about psychosis? Did you observe any of that?
I did not throughout the period in question.
So tell us what psychosis means.
Psychosis is a form of thinking where the person has disorganization and also may have a lack of what is called reality testing. So the individual may not be able to engage in behaviors or activities or cognitive thoughts to check if a belief or an experience is real or not.
So is there any particular way in which a person can display psychosis?
Psychosis can be displayed in many different ways. It can be based on the things a person says. For example, delusions are fixed, false beliefs that the individual has, and that they exist despite the person being told that that's not true or testing it with others. You also can at least suspect psychosis in the form of hallucinations, which are unreal stimuli that an individual experiences. Sometimes you may see individuals actually moving their body to respond to stimuli that they think or they are experiencing in the environment. But hallucinations can also be taste, smell, or things that you hear or things that you see or feel on your body. And there is a kind of psychosis that includes some of that, but also simply includes an individual's lack of ability to act in an organized manner.
So a person in psychosis can sometimes do the normal things that they always do, right?
It depends on what kind of psychosis and how bad the psychosis is or to what extent it is occurring. But individuals with, say, delusional disorder, which is a disorder where your problem is you have a delusion that is affecting your life, those individuals can mostly go about their lives in other areas, at least other areas that don't have to do with that particular false belief.
What about with hallucinations? How does that manifest itself?
There is a subgroup of the population that actually experiences hallucinations frequently and has no negative effect from it. But for those who have hallucinations as a part of a disorder of psychosis or bipolar or mood, there are ways in which the individual can live with the psychosis or live with the hallucination and be able to be resilient to it and go ahead with their lives. So
even if a person does have some form of psychosis or has delusions or hallucinations, they could still manage in society by following the rules, right?
Like I said, it depends on which delusion or which hallucination, but there are individuals, and it may be who can, and there may also be people who can on a stable basis, but there also are individuals.
Next question.
As far as a person who might be suffering from psychosis, can they appreciate or do they know right from wrong?
There's no reason that psychosis in of itself inhibits a person's ability to know right from wrong.
Now, as far as in this case with this particular defendant, you have identified that you believe it's a major depressive disorder, right?
Yes.
Did you consider other diagnoses?
Yes.
What about bipolar? Did you consider bipolar?
I weighed whether there might have been bipolar disorder.
And so why not for this defendant?
Well, to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, you need to have had a manic episode. That's at least for bipolar type 1. For bipolar type 2, you need to have had a hypomanic episode. And there's no information in the available record that displays either of those. So you can't diagnose bipolar disorder.
Did you consider the fact that this defendant, or that there's been some indication of postpartum for the defendant?
Yes.
And did that affect your opinions about diagnosis?
As I said before, in psychiatry, we diagnose based on the symptoms that the individual presents with. So in the DSM, in our manner of diagnosing, when you have discerned what is the prominent symptom that the individual is suffering from, that becomes the disorder that carries your diagnosis. There are times that you can designate that it has occurred in the postpartum period. DSM states that that would be within 4 weeks of birth. It also allows for the symptoms to have occurred before birth. So that is the standard that we utilize when we choose to add on that designation of something being postpartum.
Could I object? It doesn't matter what we do, it's what he does.
All right, next question.
So as far as consideration of postpartum, do you rely on the DSM-5 in your diagnostic criteria?
I do.
You're aware that there are other, that it's not universal across the world, and that there are other opinions about the postpartum period, right?
I'm aware that there are psychiatrists and others who have asked to make a specific diagnosis that relates to psychiatric problems in the postpartum state. That has been studied over the years. At this point, that has been suggested to the makers of the DSM and has been rejected.
But it's, so